Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving deep into the ideas of John Stuart Mill.
Yeah, this should be good.
Yeah, his ideas on freedom of thought, but, specifically how those play out in our modern world.
You mean like with the internet and social media?
Exactly, where everyone's got an opinion and a platform to share it.
Yeah.
So that makes you wonder, can a society, built on the idea of progress actually end up stifling?
Like squashing?
Yeah, squashing that diversity of thought and needs to actually keep evolving.
That's the big question, isn't it?
And that's what we're going to try to figure out today. We're using
This lecture.
this YouTube lecture by an Italian philosophy professor. He uses some pretty interesting examples like flat earthers and the whole anti-vax thing.
To illustrate Mill's points. That's a clever approach. What I find really fascinating about Mill
Yeah.
is that his ideas, they're from the 1800s,
Yeah.
but they feel even more relevant now
Oh, absolutely.
than ever. Like he wasn't just talking about some, abstract philosophy.
Right.
He was really trying to grapple with those forces that shape
Like how we think.
how we think, how we form our beliefs, and what that means for the future of society. It's powerful stuff.
Okay, so let's break it down, starting with the basics. What was Mill's, core argument when it came to freedom of thought?
Well, Mill, he believed in three fundamental liberties
Okay.
that any free society should be built on. First, you've got the freedom of thought and expression. Basically, you have the right to think what you want and
To say it.
and to express those thoughts,
Uh,
even if they're not popular.
Even if they're, controversial.
Exactly. Then you have the freedom to actually act on those beliefs,
Okay.
as long as your actions don't harm anyone else, of course.
Right, of course.
And finally, there's the freedom of association, the right to form groups and communities.
Based on shared ideas.
Yeah, based on shared ideas.
So even in a society like ours, where we supposedly have these freedoms,
Right.
you're saying there are still forces that push us towards conformity.
Exactly. Mill, he argued that even in, seemingly democratic societies, there are these powerful forces, often invisible pressures.
That shape our thoughts.
Yes.
Yes.
Shape our thoughts and beliefs without us even realizing it.
It's like we're being nudged in a certain direction.
Yeah. And he made this really thought-provoking analogy to Darwinian evolution.
Oh, interesting.
How competition between different organisms leads to, the survival of the fittest.
Right.
Mill believed that the marketplace of ideas also needs this robust clash of viewpoints, even bad ones, to drive societal advancement.
So you're saying disagreements, even bad ideas, can actually be good for progress.
Exactly. If everyone just agrees all the time, there's no real challenge to our assumptions, no, friction to spark new ideas.
Like a mental workout, right? If you don't challenge yourself, you don't grow.
That's a great way to put it. And the professor points to three main culprits in modern society that contribute to this sort of homogenization of thought.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are these culprits?
All right, so first up, we've got industrialization and mass production.
Okay.
Now, while those have raised living standards for many,
For sure.
they've also led to a lot of uniformity in what we consume, how we live. It's eroding individuality.
Can you give an example?
Imagine a century ago, the daily life of someone in rural Italy. Drastically different depending on what region they were in. But today, thanks to mass production, global markets, their lives are likely much more similar no matter the region.
That's a good point. You see that everywhere, not just in what people buy, but how they spend their free time, too.
Exactly. And then we have the second culprit, standardized education. Mill saw the schools of his time as, stifling independent thought.
Ah, interesting.
He believed they were more focused on molding students to fit these predefined molds.
Right, like churning out obedient citizens.
Yeah, instead of nurturing their unique potential and encouraging critical thinking.
And that critique of education, it feels so relevant even today.
Totally. We're still grappling with how to balance teaching essential skills with fostering creativity and individuality.
It's a tough balance.
It is. Mill was really influenced by thinkers like Rousseau,
Oh, right.
who believed that education should cultivate the unique potential within each individual.
So it's not about treating humans like machines,
Exactly. Not about programming them.
but nurturing that capacity.
Yeah, that capacity for critical thought and independent judgment.
Okay, so we've got mass production potentially making us think and consume alike, and then standardized education, maybe hindering our individuality. What's the third factor?
The third culprit, according to the professor, is mass politics.
Okay.
Now, while greater voter participation,
Sure, that's generally a good thing.
yeah, generally a good thing, but the rise of mass political parties, Sometimes it can lead to,
Like a watering down of ideas.
yeah, watering down of ideas
Yeah.
and a reluctance to embrace truly different or challenging perspectives.
So are you saying that in trying to appeal to the widest possible audience, parties end up avoiding those bolder, newer ideas?
Yeah, that's the idea. They tend to gravitate towards the safest position.
To avoid alienating voters.
Exactly. Which ultimately can stifle truly innovative thinking and policymaking.
Makes sense.
And, to really drive home the power of conformity, the professor digs into some fascinating psychological experiments.
Ooh, I love a good psychology experiment.
Well, this one's a classic. It's called Ash's Line Experiment
Okay.
from 1951. Imagine you're in a room with 7 other people, and you're asked to compare the lengths of different lines.
Okay. Sounds simple enough.
Right. But here's the twist. You don't know this, but the other 7 people are all in on it. They're part of the experiment.
You're
And,
all gonna lie.
well, they're instructed to deliberately give the wrong answer.
Oh, wow. So what happens? Do people just go along with it, even when it's obviously wrong?
It's pretty surprising, but a full 25% of the participants conformed to the group's incorrect answer, even though they could clearly see it was wrong. They doubted their own perception rather than standing out from the group.
That's a little unsettling, isn't it? It shows just how easily we can be swayed,
Right.
even when we know something is wrong.
It really highlights the power of social pressure.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how often we do that in everyday life without even realizing it.
Right. And it's not just about consciously trying to fit in. There's another experiment, this one from 1936
Oh, okay.
by Muzaffar Sharif. This one sheds light on the unconscious.
So, like, involuntary almost?
And that unconscious, almost involuntary nature of conformity. It involves something called the autokinetic effect.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that. What is it?
Basically, it's this visual illusion where a stationary point of light appears to move when you're in a dark room.
Oh, okay. I think I've seen that before. Yeah, it's trippy.
Right. So when people judge the apparent movement of this light, when they were alone, their answers varied a lot.
That makes sense.
But when they were put in a group setting,
Okay.
their perceptions gradually converged towards the group average.
Interesting.
And what's even more fascinating is that even when these individuals were tested alone again later, their judgments were still influenced by the group norm.
So even when they had a chance to think it over on their own,
Right.
their perception had already been shifted by the group.
Exactly. It highlights how deeply ingrained conformity can be in our social behavior.
That's wild. It really makes you think. So how does all this connect back to John Stuart Mill
Yeah.
and his emphasis on dissenting opinions?
Well, these experiments really underscore why Mill put such a high value on independent thought
Okay.
and that free exchange of ideas. He understood that if we don't actively challenge the pressure to conform, we risk ending up in this echo chamber where everyone thinks the same way and true progress just stagnates.
That makes a lot of sense. But, Mill also argued that even bad ideas have value. How can that be true? I mean, surely some ideas are just plain wrong and harmful, right?
That's where Mill gets really radical. He believed that even the most objectionable ideas should be allowed space for debate.
Really? Even the really bad ones.
Yeah, he argued that silencing them, it actually presumes infallibility. Like we're always right and never need to question our own beliefs.
So by engaging with those bad ideas, even if we totally disagree,
Yeah.
our understanding actually becomes stronger. How does that work?
Think of it this way. When we have to actually confront and refute those bad ideas, it forces us to examine our own beliefs.
More deeply.
Yeah, more deeply. To ground our understanding in evidence and articulate our reasoning more clearly.
Okay, I see what you mean. It's like we're forced to really think it through to make sure we can back up our own position.
Exactly. The professor uses some powerful examples to illustrate this point, like starting with Holocaust denial.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's obviously a very sensitive topic.
It is.
But I'm curious to hear how this connects to Mill's argument.
So, while Holocaust denial is morally repugnant
Yes.
and factually baseless,
Absolutely.
its very existence, it forces us to actively engage with the historical evidence. We have to, present the facts, debunk the lies, and ensure that our understanding of this tragic event is rooted in truth.
Not just blind acceptance.
Exactly.
So in a way, having to refute these denials actually strengthens our grasp of history.
It does. It's not about agreeing with the deniers, but using their challenge
Right.
as this opportunity to reaffirm and strengthen our understanding of what truly happened. And the same logic, it can be applied to other controversial topics, like the anti-vaccine movement.
Okay, that's an interesting one because vaccines are scientifically proven to be safe and effective. So how can anti-vaxxers, who are often, spreading misinformation,
Right.
possibly contribute to a better understanding of public health?
Well, while their views are scientifically unfounded, their presence can actually push public health authorities to be more transparent about vaccine safety and efficacy. They have to engage in better communication with the public, address concerns
Head on.
head on, and ultimately strive to build trust, which, in the end, can lead to improved public health outcomes.
So it's like even when people are wrong, their questioning can push institutions to do a better job.
Exactly. It's a classic example of how even, quote unquote, bad ideas
Yeah.
can have these unintended positive consequences. They force us to re-examine our assumptions and improve our practices.
Interesting. It makes you wonder what other bad ideas might be hiding these unexpected benefits.
Right. And speaking of bad ideas, the professor brings up this really interesting modern example, flat earthers.
Okay, I have to admit I'm curious.
He makes this rather intriguing argument that their presence, while seemingly
It
absurd,
does seem absurd.
it does, but he argues it can actually benefit our understanding of the world.
Okay, I'm listening. How can believing the Earth is flat possibly lead to a better understanding of, well, the round Earth?
It's all about engagement. He points to this YouTuber named Jackie Dale,
Okay.
who set out to make this video proving the Earth is flat.
Oh, wow.
But in his attempt to do so, he ended up replicating Eratosthenes' ancient experiment.
Oh, the one that measured the Earth's circumference using shadows and geometry?
Yes,
I remember learning about that in school.
So this YouTuber, he accidentally proved the Earth is round while trying to do the opposite.
That's pretty ironic.
It is. And what's great is that his video, despite the flawed premise,
Right.
reached a huge audience.
Mhm.
And it sparked all this renewed interest in Eratosthenes' methods.
So, in a way, this flat earther helped people understand why the Earth is actually round.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It really illustrates Mill's point that engaging with bad ideas, even challenging them head on, can actually strengthen our grasp of the good ones.
Okay, that's a pretty mind-blowing concept. But here's a question. Mill couldn't have foreseen the internet, right?
No.
And the whole issue of fake news and misinformation spreading online. So how do we reconcile his call for open debate with the need to safeguard truth and reason in a world where anyone can publish anything?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really
It's
is.
a challenge we're all grappling with. While Mill championed open debate, he probably didn't anticipate the sheer volume and speed at which information, both true and false, would spread online.
Yeah. So what are we left with? It seems like we're in this paradox. Progress requires diverse thought, even those we disagree with. But how do we prevent misinformation from, undermining the whole foundation of reasoned debate?
That's the dilemma. Finding that balance is key. And while Mill might not have predicted the internet age, his emphasis on critical thinking becomes even more crucial in this context.
So it's not enough to just be open to different viewpoints.
Right.
We also have to be really good at evaluating the information we encounter, making sure it's accurate, considering the source, all of that.
Exactly. We have to be more discerning about the information we consume, develop the skills to evaluate sources, assess credibility, and identify biases.
So it's not just about being open, it's about being discerning. And that's a challenge for all of us, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's not easy, but it's so important.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here. From Mill's core arguments to the power of conformity and the surprising value of dissenting opinions. And we've even touched on the challenges of this modern information landscape.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. But I think it's a really important conversation to have, and it definitely leaves me with a lot to think about.
Me too. And we're not done yet.
Oh, that's right. This is just the beginning of our deep dive into John Stuart Mill.
Exactly.
We'll be back with part 2, where we'll explore some more practical strategies for cultivating that critical thinking and having those more productive conversations.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive on John Stuart Mill.
Picking up where we left off.
Right, his ideas about freedom of thought and how they, play out in a world that's just overflowing with information.
Some of it good, some of it, well,
Yeah, not so good.
it's a real paradox.
It is, yeah. Mill believed progress relies on this, diversity of opinions.
Even the bad ones.
Even the bad ones, exactly. But then how do we balance that with this very real danger of misinformation, spreading like wildfire online these days?
Feels like it could lead to chaos.
Yeah. That's the challenge we left off with in part 1. So where do we go from here? How do we navigate this tricky terrain?
Well, think about it. Would you treat every piece of information you come across online with the same level of trust?
No, definitely not.
You'd probably be more skeptical of like a random social media post
Oh,
than,
absolutely.
say, a peer-reviewed scientific study, right?
100%.
And the same goes for opinions. Some are based on solid evidence and reasoning,
Hmm.
while others are, well, just hot air.
Pretty much, yeah. So I guess a big part of navigating this information overload is recognizing that not all opinions are created equal.
Exactly. We need to be able to discern, like, we really tell the difference between a well-informed perspective and one that's based on misinformation or prejudice,
Yeah. Okay, but how do you actually do that? It's not always easy to spot the difference.
especially when something sounds really convincing or plays on our existing beliefs.
Right, exactly.
That's where critical thinking comes in.
Ah,
That
yeah.
ability to really evaluate information, assess its
The
credibility,
different
yeah,
perspectives.
weigh those different perspectives against each other. Think of it as your mental toolkit for navigating this crazy information landscape.
So it's not about blindly accepting everything you hear, nor is it about just shutting down anyone who has a different opinion.
Right.
It's about engaging in that thoughtful, reasoned debate.
Exactly. And that's where Mill's ideas become so relevant, even today. He understood that true progress, it depends on our ability to have these robust intellectual exchanges, even when they're challenging. It's about being willing to, like, consider the evidence, to
Mhm.
question our own assumptions, and yeah,
Maybe even change your mind.
even change our minds when presented with compelling
I
arguments.
mean, that can be tough,
It could,
especially when we feel really strongly about an issue.
yeah,
But you're saying it's essential for like both personal growth and societal progress.
absolutely. If we only surround ourselves with people who think exactly like us,
Mm-hmm.
we end up in this echo chamber.
Right. Which can be comfy.
It can be comfy, yeah, but it doesn't really push us to grow or evolve. It's like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Okay, that makes sense. But let's get practical. Like, what are some actual steps we can take to cultivate this kind critical thinking and open-mindedness? Where do you even begin?
Well, a good starting point is becoming aware of our own biases.
Okay, biases.
We all have them, whether we realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
They're like these mental shortcuts our brain uses to process information, but they can lead us to make snap judgments or cling to beliefs that aren't really supported by evidence.
Yeah, but biases are often subconscious, right? How can you become aware of something you don't even realize is influencing you?
It's a process, for sure, but simply acknowledging that we all have biases is a good first step. It allows us to, like, approach information with a more critical eye,
Mm-hmm.
question our own assumptions. Instead of immediately dismissing something because it challenges our worldview, we can pause and ask,
Okay.
what's the evidence here? What are the different perspectives on this issue?
So it's about taking a step back, engaging with the information thoughtfully, rather than just reacting emotionally or based on our preconceived notions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it also means being willing to engage with sources of information that we might not normally agree with. It's so easy to, like, stick to the same news outlets.
Yeah, the same websites, same social media feeds.
Yeah, the ones that just reinforce our existing beliefs,
You
right?
feel good.
It does. But true critical thinking, it requires us to venture outside of those comfortable echo chambers.
So you're suggesting we actively seek out different viewpoints,
Mm-hmm.
even those that might make us uncomfortable.
Precisely. Now, this doesn't mean we have to agree with those opposing viewpoints. The goal is to understand why someone might hold a different perspective, what evidence they're basing their beliefs on, and how those beliefs relate to our own.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's about broadening our understanding and recognizing that the world is rarely black and white.
It's like that saying, walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
Right.
By trying to understand where someone's coming from, even if we disagree, it can lead to a more productive, more nuanced conversation.
Exactly. And this can be really challenging, especially today. It feels like we're constantly bombarded with this polarizing content.
Yeah, for sure.
And the social media algorithms, they can trap us in echo chambers where we only see information that reinforces our existing views. It takes a conscious effort to break free from those patterns.
It's true. It's so easy to just scroll through your feed, see the headlines or posts that confirm what you already believe. But you're saying if we really want to develop those critical thinking skills,
Yeah.
we need to be more intentional about seeking out those diverse perspectives.
Absolutely.
Mm.
But it's not just about seeking out different viewpoints. It's also about evaluating the quality of the information we're consuming. Like, how do we know what to trust in a world where anyone can publish anything online. That's another crucial aspect of critical thinking.
It's a huge question, right? How do we differentiate between the credible sources
Right.
and those that are just spreading misinformation, propaganda? It's not always obvious.
That's where those critical thinking skills really come in. We need to develop our ability to assess the credibility of sources, to check facts, to identify biases. Just because something sounds convincing or it aligns with our existing beliefs, it doesn't automatically make it true.
That is so true,
We
yeah.
need to be more like detectives,
Ooh, I like that.
investigating the information we encounter rather than just passively consuming it. And sometimes that means being willing to challenge our own beliefs,
Yeah, even when it's uncomfortable.
even when it's uncomfortable. Yeah.
That's a tough one, but crucial. Especially when you come across information that confirms your deeply held beliefs or plays on your fears. It's tempting to just accept it, no questions asked. But you're saying we need to apply that same critical lens,
Right.
even to the information that we find appealing.
Absolutely. Intellectual honesty, it requires us to be willing to challenge our own assumptions,
Okay.
even when it's difficult. And this is where the value of reasoned debate comes into play.
So instead of avoiding conversations with people we disagree with, we should actually seek them out as opportunities to challenge our own thinking.
Precisely. Engaging in that respectful dialogue where we can present evidence, challenge each other's claims, and hopefully, arrive at a more nuanced understanding is crucial.
So it's not about trying to win an argument.
No, not about winning.
It's about learning from each other, refining our understanding.
Exactly. And it goes back to Mill's idea that even bad ideas can have value. By engaging with them, even if we find them wrong or offensive, we force ourselves to articulate our own beliefs more clearly, maybe uncover flaws in our logic,
Yeah.
and ultimately arrive at a more robust understanding of the issue.
Like through that friction, that intellectual sparring, our understanding is sharpened.
You got it. Now, there are some practical techniques you can use to navigate this complex information landscape more effectively.
Okay, good.
One that I find helpful is called lateral reading.
Lateral reading. I've never heard of that.
It's a technique used by professional fact checkers or researchers to evaluate information online.
Okay.
Instead of just reading an article straight through or watching a video, you open multiple tabs and start searching the source, the author, the claims being made.
So it's like fact checking as you go.
Exactly. You're looking for independent verification from reputable sources. Let's say you're reading an article that claims a certain statistic. With lateral reading, you'd open a new tab, search for that statistic, see if it's been reported by other credible sources. You might also research the author or the website, see if they have a history of bias or spreading misinformation.
Wow, this is like a game changer. It's so easy to just take things at face value, especially if it comes from a source you trust or aligns with your worldview.
Right.
But this lateral reading technique,
Yeah.
it forces you to be more discerning.
Mm-hmm.
Really think critically about what you're reading or watching.
It is empowering. It gives you the tools to evaluate information for yourself, to become an active participant in the information ecosystem, make informed decisions about what to believe.
So it's not about blindly trusting experts or relying on algorithms to filter your information. It's about taking ownership, developing those critical thinking skills, recognizing that we all have this responsibility to be discerning consumers of information.
Exactly. And that's ultimately what Mill was advocating for. A society where individuals are equipped with the tools and the freedom to engage in reasoned debate, challenge assumptions, and arrive at their own conclusions. He believed this was essential for a healthy and progressive society.
So it's not about everyone agreeing all the time,
No.
but about creating a space where diverse perspectives can be heard,
Yes.
where evidence and reason are valued, and we're all constantly learning and evolving.
That's the ideal.
Yeah.
And while it's definitely a challenging one to achieve, it's a vision worth striving for.
Especially in a world that sometimes feels more focused on shouting matches than reasoned debate.
It does sometimes, yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of critical thinking, engaging with diverse viewpoints, evaluating sources, using techniques like lateral reading to navigate this complex information landscape. But where do we go from here? How do we actually put these ideas into practice, in our everyday lives?
Right. How do we actually do it?
That's what we'll explore in part 3. We'll delve deeper into those practical implications of Mill's ideas for navigating our modern world. And we'll offer some concrete strategies for cultivating critical thinking.
And having those productive conversations.
Yeah, even with those we disagree with.
Should be good.
We'll be back soon with more insights and thought-provoking discussions on the deep dive.
See you in part 3.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been spending this episode with John Stuart Mill and his ideas about freedom of thought.
And how those ideas, hold up in today's world.
Where?
Where we're bombarded with information all the time.
Right. Some true, some not so true. So for this final part, let's talk practical application. How can we actually apply Mill's principles in our daily lives? It's one thing to talk about, critical thinking, open debate, but how do we actually make it happen, especially in a world that, feels increasingly polarized?
I think you hit it when you said make it happen. Engaging in reasoned debate, it's a skill.
It is.
And like any skill, it takes practice.
Right.
Not something we're just born with.
Okay, so it's like learning a new language or a musical instrument.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to put in the work.
You do.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first steps is being mindful of how we approach conversations,
Okay.
especially with people we disagree with.
Yeah, that can be tough.
It can.
Yeah.
Think about it. Have you ever gone into a conversation with the goal of, winning or proving the other person wrong?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
How does that usually go?
Not well, usually.
Not well, right. A lot of frustration.
Yeah, a lot of frustration. And nobody really changes their mind.
Nobody changes their mind, exactly.
It's pointless almost.
Yeah. But what if, instead of trying to win, we went into these conversations with a genuine desire to understand the other person's perspective?
Okay.
Maybe even hoping to learn something new.
So it's like taking the pressure off of being right all the time.
Yeah. It requires a willingness to actually listen to what the other person is saying.
Okay.
Ask clarifying questions. Genuinely try to see things from their point of view.
So instead of just waiting for my turn to speak,
Right.
I should be really paying attention, trying to understand their reasoning.
Yeah, where they're coming from.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't mean you have to agree with them. It just means you're approaching the conversation with a more open mind, a willingness to understand.
Even if you ultimately disagree.
Even if you disagree. Yeah.
Okay. I see how that would make for a more productive conversation.
Right.
But let's be real. Sometimes people have beliefs that are, offensive or even harmful.
Yeah, that's true.
How do you stay open-minded in those situations?
That's where it gets really challenging.
Yeah.
Our emotions can definitely get in the way of rational thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Makes it tough to have a constructive conversation.
For sure.
Think about a time when you felt really triggered by something someone said. What happened?
Oh, my heart rate went up, my face got hot.
Yeah.
It's hard to think straight.
Yeah, you get defensive.
Yeah, probably said something I regretted later.
Yeah, that's a normal reaction. We all have those emotional triggers.
We do.
It's important to be aware of them.
Right, how they affect you.
Exactly. So when we feel those emotions rising,
Okay.
take a step back, maybe a deep breath, remind ourselves to stay calm, focused on understanding rather than just reacting.
So it's about being aware of your own emotional response.
Yeah.
Not letting it sort of hijack the conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that just because someone holds a belief that we find offensive or harmful doesn't mean they're intentionally trying to be malicious.
Yeah.
Often they're just repeating what they've heard or read without really questioning it.
Okay, so instead of assuming the worst, you should try to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
Why they might hold that belief.
Yeah. And by approaching the conversation with, a bit more empathy, understanding,
Okay.
you might even be able to open their minds to a different perspective.
Okay, that's interesting. So we've talked about active listening, managing our emotions, giving people the benefit of the doubt. What are some other practical tips for having these, more constructive conversations?
One strategy I find really helpful is to focus on finding common ground.
Okay.
Even if you disagree on the bigger picture, there might be smaller points of agreement that you can build on.
So instead of focusing on the differences,
Right.
you look for those shared values,
Exactly.
areas of agreement.
It might be something simple, like agreeing that education is important or that we all want a healthy environment.
Right.
Starting with those shared values, you create a more collaborative atmosphere.
Yeah, less adversarial.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like finding that point of connection
Yeah.
builds trust, makes it easier to have a productive conversation.
Right. It reminds you that you're both human beings with shared concerns.
Even if you have different approaches.
Even if you have different approaches. Exactly. Another important strategy is being willing to acknowledge when you're wrong or when you don't have all the answers.
Oh, that's a tough one.
It is tough, especially when you feel strongly about something.
Or you've invested a lot in a certain belief.
Absolutely. But admitting when you're wrong,
Yeah.
it actually strengthens your credibility.
Okay.
Shows you're open to learning. It also models that kind of intellectual humility,
Oh, great.
which can help create a more open environment.
Yeah, less defensive.
Less defensive, yeah.
So it's like saying, hey, it's okay to not have all the answers.
Right.
It's okay to change your mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Powerful message.
Yeah, especially in a world where it feels like everyone's supposed to have all the answers all the time.
Right. Exactly.
In social media, it often rewards those who are the loudest, the most confident,
Yeah.
even if they're not the most informed.
That's true. But we can resist that pressure. We can choose to be thoughtful, measured in our responses, admit when we don't know something, and be open to learning from others.
So it's about prioritizing that intellectual honesty and humility
Yes,
over the need to be right.
exactly. And another tip for having more productive conversations, focus on asking questions rather than making statements.
Okay, so instead of just stating your opinion or trying to convince the other person,
Yeah,
you ask questions to try to understand their perspective.
exactly. Shifts the focus away from trying to win
Right.
toward genuine inquiry, understanding, shows you're really interested, open to learning from them.
So it's less adversarial, more collaborative.
Yeah, like a collaborative exploration.
Yeah, instead of a battle to be won.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
And finally, it can be helpful to depersonalize the conversation. Focus on the issue itself
Right.
rather than attacking the person.
Okay.
So instead of saying you're wrong,
Okay.
you might say, I disagree with that statement because,
Right.
and then present your reasoning.
Evidence.
Evidence, yeah.
Yeah.
Keeping the focus on the issue, you can avoid triggering those emotional defenses.
Keep it civil.
Keep it civil productive.
Okay. This has been incredibly helpful. We've talked about the importance of critical thinking, engaging with diverse viewpoints, being mindful of how we approach these conversations.
It's a lot.
It is, yeah. It seems like the key takeaway is that reasoned debate, it's a skill.
It is.
We can develop it with practice.
With practice, for sure.
And while it's not always easy,
No,
it's essential for navigating our world.
absolutely.
Yeah, our increasingly complex and polarized world.
It really is.
And it's encouraging to know that these skills, you can learn them, you can practice them.
We can.
And who knows, maybe you'll even learn something new along the way.
Or change your mind.
Or change your mind. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into John Stuart Mill and the paradox of progress. We've learned a lot.
We have.
It's been really thought-provoking.
It has.
And remember, the conversation doesn't end here, right? Keep exploring these ideas. Engage in those tough conversations.
Yeah.
Never stop questioning, learning, evolving.
That's the path forward.
It is. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time.